When we talk about agriculture, we think about corn, grain, and food and cereal. We think about cows, the farm, the south, and the sun. However, there's something we don't think about: the negative effect of it on the environment. Agriculture is necessary for the human population. It's centuries old and is the largest food providing source in the world. Whole countries depend on it for their economies. And as the human population hurdles to now about 8 billion people, the amount of food needed to sustain human life grows drastically. This creates more land needed for agriculture, more water usage, and other things, adding detrimental effects on the environment, our ecosystem, and basically just adding to climate change. As of 2016, more than 1.7 billion acres were dedicated to just growing corn. That's a lot of corn. But you might be wondering, how exactly can growing so much corn or having tons of agriculture harm our environment? Contrary to popular belief, agriculture isn't as safe for ecosystems as we thought. In earlier times, it was more self-sustaining, but with an almost 8 billion population, large companies need to mass-produce crops, ultimately not taking the environment into account. There are many ways that agriculture hurts the environment. You may have heard of deforestation in the Amazon for more farmland, cutting down trees to create more produce. Or you may have heard of machines used for farming that pollute the environment extremely with harmful toxins and carbon dioxide, such as tractors, diggers, and more. However, there are three large reasons agriculture harms the environment. These are known as the big three: irrigation, livestock grazing, and chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So how do these really affect the environment? Well, let's start with irrigation. Irrigation is the process of artificially applying water to land to help grow crops. Usually the water amount is controlled. Nevertheless, irrigation harms the environment for a multitudinous ways. Agriculture accounts for 70% of all human freshwater consumption, and a majority of that goes through different sections of irrigation for croplands. This means the freshwater we get into our taps are only 30% of the freshwater we have access to. And of that resuming water that goes to industrial homes and comes back to the aquifer, only 50% is reusable, creating tons of water wastage. With the growing population, scientific models predict that irrigation will increase by 15%, requiring at a minimum of 590 acres for farming and irrigation. Irrigation also accounts for many depletion of aquifers, river systems, and downstream groundwater, not providing water access throughout the world and letting invasive plants in. This puts tons of stress on water sources, barely leaving any for wildlife, causing species to die or even go extinct in specific areas. Impacting the ecosystem also includes eroding land and adding more methane, nitrogen, and CO2 into the air just because of irrigation. The problem is, though, we are so economically dependent on agriculture that it can't be changed in a few days. However, there's a hope. Some labs are trying to grow 3D printed food as a sustainable way for nutrients. Now, the next of the big three is livestock. Moo, right? Yep, cows and pigs, but mostly cows. In fact, hundreds of millions of acres in the U.S. are set aside for cows alone. Now, livestock impacts ecosystems in a few different ways. The first being crap. Yes, cow turds. Manure from cows are responsible for many greenhouse gases in the environment. In fact, a study showed that methane from cow excrement is responsible for the majority of our methane levels in our atmosphere. Fecal waste can compromise water sources, harming surrounding wildlife that depend on those sources, in turn creating an unhealthy ecosystem. In addition to poop, livestock also need space for grazing, and too many livestock can lead to overgrazing. Grazing of native plants can allow invasive plants to come over and take necessary nutrients for the ecosystem. It can lead to erosion of soil, land, and bay areas. When cows accidentally graze native plants, it can lead to more forest fires as vital plants for an ecosystem die off and possible fire-tolerant plants could be eradicated. Overgrazing can affect the environment so much that poor grass won't be able to regenerate. This makes root systems of native vegetation get so damaged they almost die off. Tons of cows can also lead to compacting of soil, which don't allow plants to get the nutrients they need to grow, decreasing production of flowers and seeds. Organisms which rely on flowers and seeds for survival get affected even more, causing numbers of their species to die off. Since cows are essential for dairy and meat, people are starting to suggest changing to a plant-based diet to lower one's carbon footprint. Now, the last of the big three is chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Though they're extremely effective in growing plants rapidly and getting tons of produce, they are detrimental to surrounding wildlife and actually the plants that really use them. Apparently, around 1 billion pounds of pesticides are used each year in the United States, and many times they kill bugs that are useful to us. Pesticides usually end up killing bees, which are needed to carry pollen and help flowers reproduce. Without bees, we would not have our current ecosystem, let alone our biosphere. Pesticides can also run into water sources and kill off wild plants other organisms require for survival. Thankfully, there are some solutions. Researchers find that using organic pesticides such as neem oil and pepper spray effectively deter bugs and are friendly for the environment. So if you're growing a garden, try these out. Well, we know a little bit about how pesticides are harmful, but how are fertilizers? Shouldn't fertilizers help grow plants? Yes, that's correct. Fertilizers rapidly grow plants, especially corn, wheat, and rice. But most commercial fertilizers contain nitrogen, welcome back nitrogen, and phosphorus, which when released into the environment uncontrolled, can both harm animals in the farm, outside, and surrounding plants. Many chemicals for these commercial fertilizers are also petroleum-based, releasing extra CO2 into the atmosphere during production and during use of the fertilizer. And extra chemical nutrients from these petroleum-based fertilizers end up running into nearby water sources, allowing algae to grow and block the waterway. This prevents fish and other organisms from getting through, and when the algae eventually die, a dead zone is created, not allowing oxygen to form. Fertilizers in water like this can lead to poisoning of other animals, and the water can spread that poison to other ecosystems. As for solutions, some farmers are starting to use more natural fertilizers. Nobody knows which ones are the most effective, but do check them out. Some include nettle and horsetail, and they're pretty easy to grow at home. So these 3 big reasons fuel to why agriculture impacts the environment in a negative way. Of course, it's also pretty positive. It provides us food. So just be cautious about what food you buy. So if you're more interested in helping out, try researching plant-based diets, organic fertilizers, and pesticides, and 3D printed food. Thanks for watching. See you next time.